So from the previous video, we learned that the gold standard had to stop because demand and supply became more important. Like it was easier to gain value of your money if you became valuable around the world. So what happened was that countries changed their strategy. Instead of conquering countries, they began to invest more in technology and things like that. And at some point, economists said we should drop this gold-based standard because it doesn't make any sense. We need to do something new. But when they were thinking about this, the First World War began. So when this First World War started, everything stopped. Trade, tourism, everything stopped. And even people were angry about other countries and they become very nationalistic. So it had to stop. That effort on changing the system stopped. Then after that, it was also very sad times for the world. In between the wars, the world had a huge crisis similar to the one that we are having in 1929. There was a huge crisis, and everywhere in the world was poor. So similar to what's happening right now. So it also had to stop. And then we had World War II, so it also had to stop because of the war. But in 1944, before the end of the war, the economists say like we had enough. It's almost 50 years or even more, maybe 70 years since we realized that the gold standard doesn't work. We need to do something, and we need to do that before the war ends because maybe there will be another war and we can't wait until another war ends. So we need to do something now. So in the end, the winning countries from World War II, except Russia, in this case, the US, France, and the UK, met in Bretton Woods. In this meeting, it was Russia too, because they decided to, here is when they founded the United Nations. Bretton Woods sat down near Boston, and then they knew already that they were going to win in 1944, and they met, and then they decided to found the United Nations, and they created two other things that are very important: the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. These two organizations had a clear philosophy, and they pushed these two organizations to push that philosophy too. The, the main philosophy behind these organizations and even the United Nations is that they wanted to change the system, the gold standard system, above other things like, I don't know, maybe they didn't like communism, but they wanted to finish with the gold standard. So they said, we are going to set new rules for the exchange rates. And they said the way that in which exchange rates are going to be calculated are that instead of gold, you will be backed by dollars. So instead of just acquiring gold, you should acquire dollars because the reference rate, the one that you will start working with, something like this, $2 per pound or whatever, will be how much money do you have per dollar in your reserves. So they said instead of focusing on gold, focus on dollars. So the more dollars you have, the better will be your reference rate. But once we start with this new system, focus on demand and supply. If more people demand your money, you can sell it at a higher price, it's okay, and then you will become more powerful. So that is the philosophy of these new systems. And the creation of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank was very important because the objective of the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, is to help countries that can't pay their debts or that they don't have any more money and no one is willing to give them money. So they knew that Germany, Japan, and Italy will start after the war with huge debts and a lot of problems. So they said, we are going to create this organization who will lend them money, and the only thing that they will need to do is to obey our rules. We're going to set them some policies and then just need to obey. And any country can apply for a loan at the IMF. They only need to obey. And it made sense because the only ones who would apply for a loan at the IMF are countries who are in huge problems. And it also makes sense that if you are in huge problems, you need help to set your policies. So it was quite logical. And they said, yes, it sounds good. We have good stories about the IMF, like the case of Japan and Germany, for example, and we also have bad cases, like the case of like Malaysia and Thailand. Like there were countries, even Mexico, I think that they received aid from the IMF, but in the end, the policies didn't work out that well. And other countries experience the same thing, and for them, the policies work really well, like Germany and Japan. So it's not black or white, it's somewhere in between. It has good things and bad things, but the important thing is that because of this, the new systems emerged and everyone dropped the gold standard, which was the rule about that time. And the World Bank is something similar, but the World Bank, the objective of the World Bank is to end poverty in the world. So they always help or finance projects that are aimed to reduce poverty. So especially for very poor countries like in Africa or in Asia. So the World Bank was helping these countries, but also the condition was that they should obey their economic policies. Some criticisms are that these policies focus a lot on keeping communism away instead of actually helping the country in their development. But in the end, it was a Cold War. So I think I think for the U.S. and capitalist countries, they focus only on pushing away the communism. But it was like 50 years ago, so we need to set into that context. So in the end, by this time, from 44 until 73, it worked as a dollar standard. Like countries try to gain more dollars and dollars. But in 73, something really funny happened because some countries were doing so well, like Japan and Germany. They were acquiring so many dollars that the US ran out of dollars and they didn't have enough dollars to send them to these countries. So in 73, there was a huge crisis in the US because of that, and also because the oil producers in the Middle East decided to stop producing oil, and then the US didn't have any oil, and it was a huge crisis. So they said, you know what? We need to stop this thing. We need to stop the dollar-based standard or whatever it is. So we are going to drop this idea, and now everything is just the market. It's demand and supply. And in 73, they also stated 10 different systems on which countries can work their exchange rate. These systems move from fixed systems, which are manipulated by the government, to free systems that are entirely manipulated or affected by the market. So we are going to learn about this in the next class. To finish with the story, in 97, also something really funny happened because some countries decided to go for the most fixed systems that were manipulated by the government. So examples of those countries are Mexico. Mexico from the 70s until 90s, they manipulated the currency. The government set the rate and they manipulated everything. It was supposed to work well, but because of corruption and bad management, it was the opposite. Instead of manipulating the currency for the well of the country, they did a really bad job and it worked out really bad. And on the contrary, Southern Asian countries did the opposite. They became very free in the 70s, and they also had a huge crisis, also similar because of corruption and things like that. So in the end, none of the two choices worked well. And in 97, they had a huge crisis, these Southern Asian countries, because they were doing well with investments and everything. But at that time, in 97, their technology became quite old, and all the money went to the US. Do you remember the dot-com bubble? Like everyone was investing on Yahoo and these kind of new companies. So all the money went to the US, and these countries went into a huge crisis. Here in Mexico, we also had a huge crisis for quite the opposite reason. In 94, because the government was doing so many interventions, we went into a huge crisis because all these government control organizations and companies just failed and they couldn't pay back their loans. Mexico also went into not paying their loan, and that's really bad for the country. So Mexico and Southern Asian countries decided to do new things, change their systems, and then they moved into something new. We are going to continue with this in the next class, which is to understand the classifications of systems for exchange rate systems, like how do countries manage their currencies, how can they affect to make it better, which ones are more free or market-based and which ones are more controlled and manipulated by the government. It doesn't mean one is good or bad. We learned that from Mexico and Southern Asian countries, that they chose the opposite and they got the same result, the same bad result. So in the end, It's not that there is one single answer to which one is the best system, but instead is ask yourself what is your context, and from that you can answer to your own solution. So I think that will be all for today. I hope that you understand these four concepts. That's the objective of today's class. If you have any question, feel free to come to the Zoom class. I will be happy to help you. I can give you more examples. And this will be the end of today's class. As I said, in the next class, we're going to start with the with the exchange rate systems. How do we classify the systems? What are the advantages? Where can they work and all that? We're going to use a lot of examples from real life. And I think that's pretty much everything for today. So have a good day and see you later.